want to kind of take a look at the resolution with three-dimensional objects. Sometimes chart testing doesn't tell the whole story. Also beyond this, with this, we have just some kind of living room type elements behind that will create various challenges for the rendering and the subject isolation, and that's another thing I want to compare. Our lighting is natural light accompanied by a Westcott softbox with a fixed light. It's a daylight CFL equivalent of 400 watts that is illuminating our main subjects here. And so let's jump into the test and see what we get. Okay, well, let's take a look at comparing an image shot here from the 35mm f2 USM and then compared with the new 35mm f1.4. So the 35mm f2 is a very sharp lens even from wide open, and if we take a look closer here, we'll see that even wide open, and this is our primary subject, I use 10 times live view focus here, and then also a mirror lockup to make sure that there's no vibration, 2-second countdown. And so we see that resolution on the texture here in the fur of the primary source looks good. And however, if we look over here at the image from the 35mm f1.4L Mark II, we see that there is just a little bit better resolution, and also it's a little bit smoother rendering by comparison. And there's a few other areas, however, that I want to point out that are important here. And so we'll come back to that in a moment. First, let's go this way. Now, obviously our focus is here, but you see a difference here in the kind of the texture sheen on the image from the 35L2 as compared to, it's a little bit duller looking on the 35IS. Here's another thing that I noted when I looked at it. If you can see closely here, there is a bit of a kind of a haze that's taking place in the way that the light handling is on the edge of this texture, the metal that's here. Another thing that I really kind of stood out to me is that when I went to this area where there's external source of light very brightly reflected off snow outside, you'll see that there are a lot of harder edges here from the 35IS, and look at how much smoother. Now these are both at f2 right here. I'm using equivalent apertures, but even so, it's a much softer in the fall off here on the 35L Mark II. Another area is in the background we have this decorative, and it's various reeds that are coming up. And you'll see here that it's just softer looking, less hard edges once again in the 35L2. It's little things, but this is what really sets this lens apart. Another area here is you'll see this is a kind of a metal and then glass decoration. And you'll see that the bokeh circles are just a little bit bigger and softer here on this image. And once again, it's the edges. You see it's smoother right along the edge here. And then one other area that kind of stood out to me also was here. And you'll see that there is a little bit more pronounced green fringing. This is a bokeh area with some bright lights. And so again, it's very smoothly handled with the 35L2 image, and just a little bit worse with the 35IS. Overall, too, here I noted that the color rendition is a little bit different. It's softer and a little bit warmer here in the out of focus area. You see, as far as the framing, these are very similar, but once again, even right here at the edge, the out of focus area is a little bit softer. And once again, up here, this is a reflected ceiling fan. And even in these decorative candles here, everything is just a little bit softer in the defocused region. And as a result, the overall image is a little bit better from the 35L Mark II. Now we'll compare the two images. Now we have on the left side, we have the 35 f2IS. On the right side, we are now using the Sigma 35mm f1.4 art, and unfortunately it is not set up properly to where it reports accurately. It would just show up as 35mm for you in either Adobe Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw for Photoshop. So let's take a look at some of those same areas, starting with kind of our center focus point. Now I will note, and I noted it in the main review, that the Sigma is by far the worst of all the options to focus. it has a very, very short focus throw, and so if you need to manually focus, as I did for this series, it is the hardest to focus. That being said, the difference between these two images in terms of resolution, they're both at f2, is much less noticeable here. If anything, I would say that I slightly prefer the contrast and the fine fur kind of area on the Canon. And then if we look over here at this doll, it's pretty tough to determine a difference. I would, I think, give a little bit more of an advantage to the Sigma here and the kind of modeling on the face. But let's jump back and look at some of those areas. Now we'll see here that once again there's less of that haze compared to the 35 IS image on the Sigma, and so Sigma's doing a good job here. And to an extent, it's the same is true of this plant here. The one thing that I do notice is that you'll see a little bit more green fringing, and that's an area where the Sigma does suffer a bit compared to the new Canon, and so there's a bit more green fringing here. If we look here and compare this, once again, I would say I prefer the softness of the Sigma's rendering of this decorative here. And looking up again at this glass container, once again, the Sigma, you can tell just the lines are a little bit softer overall. One thing I did note here is that you definitely see a little bit more of the green fringing. The fringing was non-existent on the Canon, but here the 35 IS shows it a bit, but it's just a little bit more pronounced here from the Sigma as well. Off in this corner, kind of similar results, although you will note that the Sigma is framing just a hair bit wider than what either of the Canons are. And so there's just a little bit more here along the frame. But once again, there's just a little bit less hard edges, and that's a good thing when we look at this portion of the image. Now here's the showdown that many of you are looking for. This is looking at the Sigma on the left, 35 millimeters, and now we are at f1.4 wide open, and now the new 35L2 is on the right. And so let's start by looking at that center focus area. Now once again, you can see that overall, look at the little brooch here, compared the two. It's, you know, these are minute at this stage, but I do see a little bit more detail on the Canon's image. Also, if you'll note behind, just in the grain here of the bench, there's a little bit more detail texture rendering, a little bit more contrast in this area. Now if we go over and look at the doll, we'll note a few things here. Number one, the Canon is actually rendering a little bit cooler than that of the Sigma, and in this case I prefer the little bit of extra warmth that's in like the quote-unquote skin tones on the doll on the left side, and so in this particular image I prefer the extra bit of warmth that's there in the Sigma on that point there. Now if we examine this point here where there was kind of some light bleeding from the 35 IS, neither one of these lenses are producing that. And then if we go into this kind of out of focus region with the very bright highlights, you'll see again it's faint, but there's just a little bit more softness here compared to a little bit harder edging on the Sigma. And then also if you'll note at the very edges all along here, there's a little bit more of the green fringing, and you see it most down in this area here. When it comes to the Sigma as opposed to the Canon. Now this out of focus area here, we'll see that it's just a little bit softer on the Canon itself, and similarly true here when we come to this glass surface here. Now you'll see here, once again, it's close except for there's a little bit more of the green fringing that's apparent on the Sigma image. When I look at this portion of it here, I see just a little bit more softness from the Canon. And then of course in this corner again you see that the Sigma is framing just a little bit wider than that of the Canon. With both lenses at f2.8, really the differences here become so finite that they're nearly indetectable. Both of these lenses are turning in a basically perfect performance across the frame. Contrast and resolution is really high here on our central target, likewise here. It seems to me that there's just a little bit more texture pop from the Canon along the head of the bear here. And now the chromatic aberrations are a little less pronounced from the Sigma. There's still a little bit more dominant green fringing down in this area. And overall, I would say there's just a hair more softness on the Canon as opposed to the Sigma in this portion. But up here now in this reflection, you see that they are basically equal. There may be a hair more green fringing, but the chromatic aberrations have cleaned up for the most part on the Sigma. And so across the frame, this is a generally perfect performance. Unfortunately, I don't have the new Tamron 35mm f1.8 VC lens on hand to test, although I did compare a few months ago. I do have the Tamron 45mm f1.8, and so I will give you a quick view here, although the test really isn't as effective because of the difference in framing and thus depth of field from this. But this is the new Canon 35mm f1.4 and at f1.8 along with the Tamron at f1.8. And so we're going to see here a couple of things. First, I want to point out, kind of right off the bat, that the Tamron, we're at 1/50th of a second compared to 1/60th of a second from the Canon. The light transmission is better on the Canon as opposed to the Tamron, and that's something that DxO brought out in their review of the Tamron lens. Also, it's surprising how different the framing is here from the two lenses. You wouldn't think at 45mm compared to 35mm that's much of a difference, but you see as you look at this image that framing is very noticeably different from the top corner here to the left side of the image. And then, of course, as we zoom in to a pixel level, you see there is a really big difference in the magnification of the primary subject here. So at f1.8 for both lenses, we see that, of course, the Tamron is turning in a surprisingly strong performance here. A lot of great detail and contrast in the texture here. I will point out, however, that the overall text on the label here is clearly sharper on the Canon, despite it not having as much magnification here. If we look at the picture of the doll, the depth of field is more shallow here for the Tamron because of the greater magnification, and so we can't get as much information on the texture here. But overall, looking at the face of the doll, overall it's hard to see a lot of difference in the actual texture of the face. However, depth of field, it's hard to tell what's playing a part. It's clear that this bolt here is more out of focus than it is on the Canon, so we can't draw too many conclusions from this overall. We can look at a couple of areas. For one, here on this edge, the Tamron is not showing the light bleeding that the Canon 35IS is. However, you can see just a hint of purple fringing that's there that's not evident on the Canon 35L Mark II's image. Now, if we look towards our back that we've been looking at, the background is clearly more diffused for the Tamron, and that is because of that longer focal length. Can't really draw any conclusions. I will say that this is looking nice here, nice soft edges on this out of focus area. But here's one area where we can certainly see a difference, and that is the Tamron is certainly more prone to chromatic aberrations. You see a stronger green fringing here than probably what we've seen from any of these other lenses overall. So you can't draw as many conclusions here, but it does give you a little idea of how the resolution compares in a three-dimensional setting for these two lenses. Let me add to this my real-world shooting observations, and that is that, as this test shows, all of these lenses are really capable of producing highly resolved, excellent-looking images. That being said, that when you actually begin to look at the details in the images as a whole, there certainly is something special about the new 35L Mark II that sets it apart from all of these other lenses. It is, of course, the most expensive of the bunch by a wide margin, but if you are looking for what I believe to be the absolute best image quality available in a 35mm focal length, the new Canon 35L Mark II certainly shows its worth in all of the little details, but also in the global look of the images that are really quite special. I'm Dustin Abbott. I hope that this has helped you in your quest for the perfect 35mm lens. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Have a great day.